Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service offers tax preparation for individuals and businesses across from City Hall in Nisswa and on the web at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the 6th season of Lakeland Currents. And want to give a special thanks to our underwriter, Nisswa Tax Service. They've been with us since the very beginning, our first show, and we appreciate that very much. We thought we'd kick off the new year talking about baseball. We had such a frustrating season with the Twins this year. I think we lost 20 of the last 25 games. And we thought we'd bring in someone who knows a little bit about baseball, but we're not going to talk about the Twins. We're going to talk about baseball in Minnesota, and we're going to talk specifically about some of the black players that play in Minnesota, because there's some really unique history that affects all of us, because it covered the whole state, and I think you'll be surprised to learn some of the interesting information today. My guest today is Peter Gorton. Peter is a baseball historian, and I have to be honest, I've known Peter since he was just a little tyke. Our futures go back a long ways. But anyway, Peter is doing baseball history as a sideline. It's not what his full-time job is, but it's becoming almost a full-time job, isn't it, Peter?
It can be, yes.
It can be. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ray. I appreciate it.
And tell us a little bit about how you got interested in getting into the history of baseball in Minnesota.
I've always been a big fan of baseball, and I thought this was an opportunity for me to give back. This was an opportunity to find stories that people didn't know anything about. It took me a long time to realize that after I amassed several years of doing research, that people didn't understand or had very limited knowledge of black baseball. And so I took that as a place to focus on, because it had a great opportunity to tell stories that people had never heard. You can go to the internet and figure out what Roger Hornsby did any day of the week. You can't go to the internet in that same time period and find anything about black baseball players, at least at the time when we started doing this. More and more has come out more recently, but this is an opportunity to find stories not only that affect everyone still today, but they're really Minnesota stories. And they're stories about pioneers in the game from our state.
Tell me what you do besides this. This obviously isn't how you make your living. How do you make your living?
No, I'm technically a presentation services coordinator for Faegre Baker Daniels, a large law firm in Minnesota. And I help people with presentations and do a lot of video conferencing and connecting our 13 offices worldwide.
Now, getting back to the baseball for a minute, I know you have done some research for a book that was written about baseball. Could you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is actually how I came across the opportunity to find out about these stories. I was asked by my former high school social studies teacher, Steve Hoffbeck, to try and find out something about an obscure baseball player named John Donaldson. He was writing a book that chronicled the state's history of black players, and he was kind of taking a decade at a time, and so he needed someone from in the 1920s. And so I started getting into that and finding out that there was a real opportunity to do the research. Here's a couple of photographs that I provided that showed general baseball stories or general baseball images from the early 1900s. This one is from 1909. And so what we do is we're collecting photographs and stories and trying to tell their stories of these unique black baseball players, as many of them as we can, as often as we possibly can. And this is another opportunity to do that.
Baseball has always been big in Minnesota, I think, from the early 1900s. And you can see by some of those photos that lots of people used to attend those games. And I remember when I was a youngster, I was living at the time in Bertha, and I remember when we had Legion Club games, it was a big event in our community, and lots of people would come to that. And in your research, you've discovered that a lot of these black players played in a lot of our communities.
No doubt about it. The particular time period that I specialize in is around 1910. And so around 1910, there was no radio, no TV. There were no other distractions for anybody. There barely was phone service in Bertha. So people were focused on, this was the thing to do. There wasn't anything. They'd always play after church on Sundays, so everybody would come out of their churches and head down to the ballpark and watch games. It was a social activity. There was no, a lot of the population couldn't read, so they weren't involved in newspaper reading. So there was, but this is where everybody came to learn the stories of people, and so it was passed on. Something that we really lost touch with in terms of coming together in crowds. We now do everything on the social medias and that type of thing. And back then it was, this is where you learned your information about not only your neighbors, this is where any entertainers would come, and you learned about the world at large was coming together on Sundays. And that was a big part of the state of Minnesota, particularly way back when in the 1910.
And you can think back in that era, it must have been hard for a black player to come to the small white communities in Minnesota, because I know even there were chapters of the Ku Klux Klan actually
Yes.
in Minnesota.
Yes.
Maybe there still are. I don't know about that, but so it must have been a challenge for some of these players who never had an opportunity at that era to play at the highest levels in Major League Baseball. This was as good as it could get for them, wasn't it?
Sometime around 1890, the Major League Baseball and the organized leagues at that time drew the color line. They decided that baseball was only for white players, and so it ostracized black players to go and try and find a living, make a living playing baseball. They had to come out to the bush, as they called it at the time, so that way out here in the state of Minnesota, where they could find acceptance. Listen, the people who were here in the early 1900s were first-generation immigrants. They were very comfortable with people who weren't like them because they just got here themselves. There wasn't a whole sense of ownership of the countryside or anywhere. There were, parts of communities were heavily into different nationalities, and so people were coming here, and they were the black players were paid well when they came here, and so they were known as major leaguers. And one of the themes that I want to talk about is that during the segregated period, approximately 1890 or approximately 1946, these players who were not in the organized leagues, they were major leaguers. And this was your opportunity in Bertha or any of the small towns in Minnesota to see actual major leaguers. You couldn't go, even in Minneapolis and St. Paul, they had association teams. Those weren't considered major leagues. They heard about Babe Ruth and they heard about all the players from those eras based on this was their opportunity to see actual major leaguers that they knew were behind the color barrier.
So who are some of the early players that you're talking about that you've been studying here?
I studied primarily John Donaldson, but he's not the only one. There was lots of great black baseball players. We have some photographs of George Wilson, who played in Waseca, Minnesota, with a couple other of his black teammates here. They're pictured. George Wilson in the upper left. He was hired by the Eco Flour Company to play baseball for their team against local competition. They paid him money to work in their flour mill and play baseball on Sunday. This is where opportunities were for black players. There are also players like Walter Ball. Walter Ball had the color line drawn on him 3 times. He started playing in leagues, and then the league got together the next season and decided that we were going to just remain white as well, so all the black players had to go find work somewhere else. And so the color line was drawn on Walter Ball 3 times. Here he is in St. Cloud. He played for them in 1901 and 1903. So the color line was drawn on these guys. They had to go find a place to play. And so they would go move around, and rarely did they play for extended periods of time in places until the 1920s, when several players played for a great deal of time. But in the time of Walter Ball and George Wilson, 2 of the greatest players ever that were black players at that time, they were held out and basically had to play way out in the sticks in order to earn their living. So it's time that modern people realize that Jackie Robinson wasn't the first black player to play. There were lots of players that were actively trying to make a living playing baseball for years and years and years beforehand, as soon as the color line was drawn in approximately 1890.
Jackie Robinson, the movie I think is called 42.
Yes.
That was his number, right?
Yep.
And when is he recognized as entering into Major League Baseball? You remember the era, what year that would have been?
Well, he played for the Kansas City Monarchs, which was an established Negro League team. After playing collegiate football, 3-sport athlete at UCLA. He played football, baseball, and basketball, I believe. And so he was a famous athlete, and he then went to the Kansas City Monarchs. Mid-1940s is when they were putting Branch Rickey was trying to get Jackie Robinson to play. They actually put him in Montreal first, to see if he could assimilate in the Canadian audience, because they knew that it would be less scrutiny. So the AAA team for the Brooklyn Dodgers at the time, that's where they put Jackie Robinson first. So 1946 was when the color line was officially taken out by Jackie Robinson's Major League debut.
So when you did the research on your book, you ran across a gentleman by the name of John Donaldson.
Yes.
And he's the person that you've really become fascinated by, isn't he? Because of, well, tell us how you got into that. How did you discover him?
Steve Hoffbeck asked me to search him for this era of 1910 to 1930 that his book was lacking. He asked a couple of other baseball historians to take a look at him. And they said, no, we can't do that. It would be too hard for us to do. So he called me, his former student, and said, you know the people in Bertha, because John Donaldson played in Bertha. You know the people there. Go there and find out as a local. Can you find out more information than other people? So I started digging there and found some information on him, found a lot of games that he played in, wrote a nice article for his book and got that part done. About that time, someone found out that Donaldson's grave was unmarked in a suburban Chicago cemetery. And so they invited me down there for the Chicago White Sox, bought his headstone, and asked me to come down there for the service. We were going to have put a headstone on him and two other grave sites in Chicago. So I went down there, and I thought there'd be a bunch of Negro League historians down there, and I could give them some of my information and let people know who I was. And I realized that nobody knew anything about John Donaldson. They knew he didn't have a lot of family that survived. So the information that I was uncovering every day was amassing and changing the story, really helping people to realize who he was. And so I realized that we got to start working on him, because his career spanned from 1908 to 1943, an extremely influential time in black baseball history. John Donaldson was the first scout in Major League history for the Chicago White Sox, so they paid for his headstone. So I came back to Minnesota and after doing the headstone in Chicago, and continued to amass information on this guy. Then it kept coming in, and I realized this is one of the greatest players of all time, and relatively nobody knows who he is. And so we keep working on him. Every day we find some more information on him, and we started this thing called the Donaldson Network. And the Donaldson Network is a group of historians, over 500 people, who have donated time and effort to find out more about John Donaldson's life and his career. And so so far we've amassed 392 wins, over 4,500 strikeouts that are documented from newspaper accounts. We have 160 games that he played in that we don't have any strikeout total for. So if you think of the number of games that he played in, somewhere around 6,000 games we have for him. So it's an incredible amount of information. I realized in the same way that Steve Hoffbeck, when he was putting the book together, couldn't do it all himself. Someone had to spearhead the effort and bring everybody together. Rather than do the whole landscape of black baseball, segment it out and try and find different eras that we can focus on in order to make the greatest impact. And so we're working on John Donaldson every day, and have been since 2004 when the headstone was put in. We keep working on them, and we've expanded the network using modern technology. We have a couple of photographs that we're going to show here, and moreover, we have some very rare film footage of John Donaldson actually playing baseball in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, on one of the first movie cameras.
Wow.
And that's from 1925. So we keep working on John Donaldson, and we work on in a social way. So we're finding lots of people who, I can't go to the middle of Nebraska where John Donaldson was in 1923 and find newspaper accounts for him. I'll go online and find somebody in a message board that covers a county in the central Nebraska and say, can you go to your downtown courthouse and find this newspaper that's in the basement and send me a copy of it? And these things just come in. Day after day after day, these accounts of games of John Donaldson all over the Midwest and upper Midwest.
I was going to ask you where he played, but he played all through the Midwest.
He played primarily in the Midwest, but we have found him in 25 states.
Wow.
This is a spread out job.
And was he strictly a pitcher?
He was a pitcher and an outfielder. He played center field for the Kansas City Monarchs, first year of their existence in 1920. He played primarily
If he was the
outfield.
first scout for the Chicago White Sox,
Yes.
how was it that he ended up without even a gravestone or anything?
He didn't have any children. There wasn't we're still working on trying to establish his genealogy. We have his brothers. He had three brothers, and or two brothers and a sister. And so we're trying to figure out if there are any surviving relatives. We openly ask as many people as we can, if you are a relative and we want to know about this, because it's important that we pass on his legacy, in particular in his family. But he's not known to have any children.
Was he a Chicago native?
No, he was from Glasgow, Missouri, which is in north central Missouri. And but his dream was to be a world traveler. And we have detailed stories, an account from his mother that said how she didn't want him to play baseball because she was very religious and they didn't want him to play baseball on Sundays. And so when he started becoming very prolific baseball, and his teams always wanted him to play on Sunday, and his mom wouldn't let him. And then so he started sneaking out, and she found box scores in his pocket of his pants and things, and they realized she went down with the intention of whipping him and taking him home after church. When she got to the ballpark, she heard cheers for her son. And she realized this is something that he could do, and it actually got him out of Glasgow, Missouri, and became the world traveler that he wanted to be.
So did he become a real star when he would come to these communities? Did people follow him?
He was known as the world's greatest colored pitcher. He was a box office draw. This is right around the time when Babe Ruth was really starting to become a household name. John Donaldson in Minnesota was a household name. Everybody knew who he was. Thousands and thousands of people would come out to see him every time as he had an appearance. So what they would do is they'd have advertisements in the newspaper. John Donaldson's coming to town. Thousands of people would come to town, and they'd make money on that. And so John Donaldson's thing was he was a star, and they knew he was a major leaguer. Much like Walter Ball and George Wilson, they knew that he was a money draw, and they could bring money in if they brought him here. So John Donaldson pitched in over 130 cities in Minnesota, which might be more than any player, black or white, in history. But he was segregated. He had to play in these places because he should have played on a larger stage. And that was a picture of the Kansas City Monarchs. He actually named them the Kansas City Monarchs, the most famous team in Negro League history. Here he is playing in North Dakota. He played all over the place. This is the first shot in Bertha. You can see the Model A cars around. And the thousands of people that would come to watch him. This is the 1920s. John Donaldson played in Bertha in 1924, 25, and 1927. They said 10,000 people would come, and the town had about 500 people in it. And today it's a hamlet. So they said 10,000 people would come to watch because they knew he was there. And so you start to get this feeling that there was a lost story. And I started finding out about all these people and all these great players that he played with and against, that their stories just weren't being told. And so we had to start digging, and so we keep digging today.
Now, is there any interest in this man from Major League Baseball?
I believe that there is, but I believe our story continues. We are doing an effort that is trying to shed light on this guy that a lot of people have chosen to forget. We're trying to turn and amass so much information and let them decide. I believe that a large problem in today's research community is that people are asked for their opinions. Was he great? Was he not great? I think he was great, but I have to be able to prove to you that he was. I can tell you that he was the greatest ever. They said he was, but I need to show you that. I can't just all of a sudden decide that he's going to be the greatest ever. So I think that the effort that we're trying to do is going to help him because we're amassing massive amounts of information on him that people generally thought was lost or not there. I've been to a lot of states to research him, and the key to John Donaldson's story is newspapers. And then in north central Minnesota, a man named Edward Backus made the world's most technologically advanced paper mill in International Falls in 1910. Of course, you knew that, Ray, right?
I did.
You did? Of course. Anyway, and the reason that John Donaldson's story survives today is we had prolific amounts of newsprint, very good paper products, and they survived. And in other states that I've gone to, you don't find newspaper print. The actual paper that it's printed on didn't survive. Oh. And so we had a great story here that nobody knew about. I've talked to historians from New York. They said they came to Minnesota, or they if you wanted to look for John Donaldson, where would you go? Well, we'd go to Kansas City and look, because that's where he played in the Negro League. Well, his story starts in Minnesota, and it starts in the upper Midwest.
So this is where he first started pitching, in Minnesota?
Well, he started pitching all over Iowa and Missouri, and then worked his way up with the All-Nations team starting in around 1911. He first started with Brown's Tennessee Rats, who ventured briefly into Minnesota. His first known appearance in Minnesota was in October of 1911. And so we kept working on that and building from that. But his story works into Minnesota when he joined the All-Nations team, which is an integrated team which had players of 6 different nationalities. They had a Chinese player, they had an Asian player, they had a Hawaiian, which wasn't a state at that time. So this was their attraction, was they were going to bring Cubans, and they were going to bring people with all different races together and travel around as a baseball, a headlining baseball outfit. So they'd come into town and they'd play against anybody who'd play against them, and they had a championship team, and they had great players that are Hall of Famers played on the All Nations team. Really a team. If you look on the Twins team, they have players from all different races, all different nationalities. They play there together now. This was happening way before 19 teens, a long time ago. For somebody, it was thought at that time. I have newspaper articles that say different nationalities can't travel or live together. I mean, this is part of the way
forbidden.
This was part of the way the world was at that time. Mm-hmm. And so they were breaking ground. It's really a groundbreaking group of great baseball players that were segregated all themselves. The major leagues was just white players at that time. There wasn't anybody from any other nationality that could do that. And so at that time, so they were relegated to go on the road. And so they had a private train car that they traveled around in, and they traveled from town to town. That's how he played in 130 cities in this state.
You said he had 500 wins that you've recorded?
We're at 392,
392,
which is a lot. It's 392
about
verified wins.
Games.
Yeah, we have 160 games that has no recorded strikeout. So we have a little over 4,700 strikeouts that are verified. So it had to say in a newspaper somewhere, John Donaldson struck out 28.
How does that compare to someone
He had a
today?
31 strikeout game in Sioux Falls.
31 strikeouts?
31 strikeouts in a game, yeah.
So he pitched well into extra innings.
Extra innings, and he lost 1-0.
Wow.
But
what's a good record for strikeouts in today's baseball games?
Oh, I would say that if you averaged over 5, that'd be a lot. John Donaldson, people said, averaged more than 10 a game for sure. People said that he was at 20 strikeouts a game, which is a phenomenal amount at any level.
We only have a couple minutes left, but you said you had a video here too
Yeah, I'd like to show the video of August. It was August 16th, 1925, shot by W.T. Oxley in Fergus Falls.
That's a good picture.
And you can see the thousands of people around in their cars, and they would sit right up to the baseline like that. And here's John Donaldson playing. Now, he was shot on this film originally because he was famous. This was a big to-do in their town to have John Donaldson come to town. So this was something that Oxley decided was important. So we found the film footage, we restored it, and captured it digitally so that we could get a better image of it. But one of the things in a modern standpoint that is often lost is we have lots of newspaper articles about black baseball players. We don't have any of them actually moving. And that's one of the things that John Donaldson's film footage here is wonderful for our effort, because we can show people today actually how he threw the baseball and how he was...
He's a left-handed, obviously.
He was a left-handed pitcher, yep. And this is August, 1925 in Fergus Falls.
And that's him?
That's John Donaldson in 1912 with the All-Nations team. The Hopkins brothers All-Nations they started out as. And here he is with the Kansas City Monarchs again. But he's important, and it's something that we need to talk about, because we are merging research organization in that we keep finding different things, and we're using modern techniques to gather this stuff. In the past, when we were trying to uncover any other player, you'd have to go to those places where he played and dig through microfilm reels or newspapers or however you get it to try and find out. We're asking people to send us things. We're asking people to tell us more about this. And so we go around and we ask in a social way, show us what you have, and we will add it to John Donaldson's record. So hopefully what we're doing is not only going to raise the profile of great black baseball players, it'll help John Donaldson get some of the legacy back that was robbed to him from history. He was a major leaguer
But never got a chance.
Never
to
had a chance to be a major leaguer.
So do you see a book coming out about something like this sometime?
I see a lot of things. I think a lot. We're working on a graphic novel where we have an artist in Kansas City who is drawing pictures of his era because there aren't a lot of photographs of him. And so we're working on that. So we're moving forward. We're trying to tell his story more and more because John Donaldson's story is equally as compelling a human interest story as it is a baseball story. He had to get along and move around in circles to make money. One of the greatest parts that I think is interesting about him is he would come to your town, he'd strike out 20 of your best players, and then you'd ask him to come back. And every year he'd come back. And so that's important in that he knew people here. He was entrenched in central Minnesota and particularly, but he played all over the state and people knew who he was. He was a big leaguer who was excluded from the major leagues, and he wasn't the only black player, but he was certainly one of the most significant.
Now, we do have a far-reaching crowd that watches
Yes.
this program, and if there's anyone in the community that has had experience with him,
Yes.
how would they contact you?
If you go to the internet, if you can do that, or you can contact you. We can find, it's relatively easy to get a hold of. I say to people, I must be one of the easiest people in the world to get a hold of. I always have 2 phones with me. I work at a large organization, but our main hub is johndonaldson.bravehost.com, which is our webpage, and we work on
Say that again, John.
It's johndonaldson.bravehost.com.
Bravehost.
Yep, it's a very inexpensive web page company, and that's what we use for johndonaldson.bravehost.com. So it's easy to find my email address there. Send me information about that. We are constantly looking for contributors because the real story of John Donaldson is hidden in all these small towns, and we need to keep talking about it. That's why I'm so excited to be here.
All right, thank you, Pete. That's a very interesting story. A lot of information I've never heard before.
It's an important story. It's something we need to keep talking about.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. It's
I appreciate
really a
it.
good topic. You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time.